on Hasidic psychology, and today we have an interesting parsha. It was a little bit more challenging to figure out exactly what the psychological topic would be. So we're going to talk about responsibility, basically, and you'll see how that fits into our parsha. So really, to give the background, this is one of those topics. By the way, I'm happy to encourage anybody who wants to open their. You don't have to open it now. You can open it when you want to. But if you turn the video on, I guarantee you that you'll get a much better viewing experience. I don't know why, but when people look at themselves and they see themselves in the in the video, so I think it increases the pleasure from the class. Okay, so you don't have to, however you feel comfortable. Responsibility is one of those topics that, growing up the way that I did, it was clear to me that, especially growing up in America, let's say, that you get out of your duty in life is basically to take responsibility over everything that you're responsible for. And if you drop the ball and you don't act responsibly, nobody else is going to do things for you. So it's pretty much, the usual American ethos, which says that basically you're free to pursue whatever you want, and if you come up short, or if not, it all depends on how much you did, on how much you tried to do things. So the amount of responsibility that you took. One of the, if I can even recollect today, after 25 years, but one of the first things that shocked me in encountering the Hasidic world, and more importantly, encountering the mindset of Rabbi Ginsburg, was that he actually thought that responsibility could be a bad word. It could actually be a 4-letter word. That bad. That responsibility sometimes taking responsibility becomes something that is almost sacrilege. And it really bothered me. Why would this be? Why would he think, why would Hasidim in general think that responsibility can turn into something very negative? So the short answer is that responsibility can become self-worship, meaning that the moment that a person thinks that there's no other agent in existence except for themselves, that pushes away the possibility of something greater than themselves acting in the world. Now, this is very, very common. It's not. Maybe spiritual people have a different feeling, but I want to focus on what the issue is. The issue is that if you don't take enough responsibility, you can always excuse yourself by saying, well, I'm not here alone. There's other people, and there's God, and it's not my fault. Meaning, not taking responsibility a lot of times becomes an excuse. It turns into a way to excuse ourselves for not having done everything that we could have. Be it whatever it is, whether it's being in earning our livelihood, whether it's succeeding in whatever projects we take on ourselves, whether it's in a relationship. Not taking responsibility can become excused by the fact that I'm not alone in this. and it becomes a very, very delicate thing to define when should I or how should I take responsibility to in such a way that I'm not beginning to see myself as the only actor here on the stage. Again, responsibility, when you take it too far, it becomes a type of self-worship. And if everything is squarely on my shoulders, 100%, then there's nothing else that's acting here. There's nothing else that's important. And that is definitely against the way that the Torah wants people to see themselves acting in the world. So this is, like I said, it's a very delicate topic, and it sort of hits, for me, it really hit against a lot of the things that I grew up with in terms of being industrious, in terms of being responsible in the end. And I'm only trying to set up the tension right now. And we'll try to define it as we go along, how Hasidic thought sees responsibility, how it sees it in a different way than you would normally get. So the way we're going to do this tonight is we're going to look at the very end of the process of constructing the tabernacle. And if you have a Chumash with you, then you can look at the verses with me. We're looking at Exodus 39:33. Actually, we'll start one verse before that, 32, and I'll read it in a translation, and then we'll get into it. So all the work of making the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, was completed. The Israelites brought everything exactly in the manner that God had commanded Moses. They brought the tabernacle to Moses, the tent, and all the accoutrements, its clasps, planks, crossbars, pillars, and bases. The roof of red-dyed ramskins, the roof of tachash hides, and the partition curtain, the ark of testimony, its rods, and the cover, the table and all its utensils, and the showbread, and so on. They brought everything to Moses. I'm skipping a few verses, and it says, Moses saw that they had indeed done all the work exactly as God had commanded, and Moses blessed them. So the question that right away creeps up is, what's the purpose of bringing it to Moses? Why do you have to bring the tabernacle, all its parts, to Moses? What good is that? If he's the quality control, so he can come and look at what has been made, what has been done. And he can say, this is what I was commanded to do. This is what I was looking for. Why do you have to bring it to him? What function does that serve? So Rashi, the classic commentary, if you open up on Safariya, you can see it in English, I'll read it. He quotes a medrash that says the following. And they brought the tabernacle unto Moses, says Rashi, for they themselves were unable to erect it. Meaning, telling us that they brought the tabernacle is in order to reveal that they tried to erect it, they tried to build it to see that everything fit and that it was what God had ordered, but they were unable to. Since Moses had done no work in the tabernacle, meaning he had not prepared anything, he wasn't an artisan, he only related what God had commanded, God left for him the task of erecting it. So that's why they weren't able to put it together. For nobody was able to set it up because of the weight of the planks, which no human strength was capable of setting up. Meaning that apart from the tabernacle proper, there was also a courtyard. And the courtyard was made with planks, and these planks were pretty tall. They were about, each one was about 10 feet tall, and they were covered in gold. So they were very, very heavy. I think we once did an estimate. It was about 2,000 kilograms for each one. That's a lot. But it's not that much. I mean, we'll talk about why it's not that much. But certainly one person can't lift it. So they tried lifting it. They tried putting it together. They're not so big also. They're only about a meter wide. So I don't know how many people you can get around one of these. But you have to lift them, and you have to put them in place, and there's rods that go in the middle that hold them together, and there's bases that keep them straight. And they weren't able to do it, so they gave it to Moses. And Moses, however, succeeded in placing it in position. How did that happen? How was Moses able to do something that they couldn't? So the Medrash continues, it says, Moses said to God, how is its erection possible by human beings? It's too heavy. I won't be able to lift this. For the same reason that everybody failed, and they're sort of passing the responsibility to me, but I'm also going to fail, because where a few people couldn't do it, certainly one person's not going to be able to do it. So God answered him, you be busy with your hand. You go through the motions. You do what you're capable of doing. What are you capable of doing? In this case, apparently what you're capable of doing is making it as if you're lifting the tabernacle, as if you're lifting the planks. So Moses appeared to be erecting it, says the Medrash, but in fact, it set itself up and rose of its own and was erected. That is why the scripture says in Exodus 40:17, the tabernacle was erected. Was erected, saying it happened by itself. That's what the Medrash Tanchuma explains. So this is an interesting Medrash. What is it trying to tell us? So the first question to ask is this really realistic? I mean, you always have to, when dealing with the Medrash is basically the homilies of the rabbis. So we're talking about something that was written anywhere between the 1st and 5th centuries. They weren't there. They didn't see what happened. They may have had a tradition about what had happened, but I don't know of any source that claims that if a Medrash says something, you have to believe that it actually happened that way. Okay? The point of the Medrash is not to tell us how things happened or what happened. It's not a play-by-play commentary on what happened. The Medrash tries to make sense in its own way of what the Torah is telling us. And the Torah, again, started by noting that the people brought the tabernacle to Moses. So why does the Torah have to tell us that? So is it realistic? Well, we know that different parts of the tabernacle were mysterious. We talked about one of them last week. We talked about the Ark of the Covenant not taking up space. The fact that it didn't take up space means that it shifted time and space in some way. Another thing that's said about the Ark of the Covenant is that it carried those who carried it. What does it mean that it carried those who carried it? It was actually very heavy. It was also plated with gold. And it was actually made out of 3 boxes, one inside the other, one made out of acacia wood and two made out of pure gold. So it was like plated. The inner wooden box was plated on the inside and on the outside by gold. Now that weighs a lot, especially considering the size. So we're talking about 1.5 cubits. A cubit is about 40 centimeters, so you're talking about 60 centimeters by 2.5 cubits, which would be about a meter, and then 1.5 cubits high. So this thing was pretty heavy, and there were 4 people that were supposed to carry it. So from a lot of places, the way that the Torah and the prophets describe this ark, it turns out that it said about it that it carried those who carried it. Now, is that a literal description or is that a psychological description? It's very hard to tell. What would it mean for something to carry those who carry it? Well, a lot of times when people are doing a job that has a tremendous amount of meaning to them, the meaning of their work carries them through. So it could be that the added value of being somebody who's carrying the ark carried the people and really caused them to not get tired when they carried this very heavy object. That's one possibility. It could also be that really something supernatural was going on. And there's no reason to say that if you're willing to accept that there was something beyond nature that was going on in the ark, that wouldn't be the case maybe with the whole tabernacle. So realistically, maybe that's what this Medrash is telling us, that Moshe Rabbeinu experienced the tabernacle putting itself together. I had to address that just to get it out of the way, sort of. Okay? It's a possibility, but I'm not going to pursue it any further. Instead, I want to focus on what is this Medrash telling us about responsibility. The amazing thing here is that this wasn't the only time that the tabernacle needed to be erected. After each time that they traveled, they took the tabernacle apart, and it needed to be put together again. So the question becomes, what good is it that Moses put it together the first time if every subsequent time, another 42 times, these are the numbers of travels that they had in the desert, in the wilderness. So if the other 42 times, the Levites had to do it themselves anyway. So what did we gain from bringing it to Moses and have him put it together the first time? What do we learn from that? So that's a question that arises if that's what you're going to explain here, that nobody could put it together, only Moses could. But we know that later on Moses didn't put it together, it was the Levites. So what changed? What was affected in people's minds that suddenly the Levites could put it together? How did Moses' interaction, the first interaction with the tabernacle, change the way that the Levites were able to put and erect the tabernacle together? Also, what does it mean that something, psychologically, what does it mean that something erects itself? That you go through the motions, but it erects itself. So again, I'm putting the realistic side of this whole discussion aside. I don't want to deal with it because I want to focus on the psychological meaning that this Medrash is revealing. Before we look at that, let's mention one of the greatest disputes regarding what we call the Third Temple that appears in all of Jewish literature. And the dispute started between Rashi and Maimonides about how the third temple is going to be constructed. Rashi, in the Song of the Sea, he comments on the verse that says, Migdash Hashem konenu yadecha, the temple of God, you, God, your hands have erected. Rashi says there that the problem with the first two temples was that they were constructed by humans. And because of that, one might say they're affected by entropy, because everything that human beings who are limited create is affected in the same way as we are by entropy. But, says Rashi, the third temple, and that's what Moses and the people are referring to in this verse, the temple of God your hands have erected, speaking about God, meaning God's hands, as it were, have erected, obviously an image and a symbol, but the meaning is that the third temple will be completely erected by God, and therefore it will never be destroyed. And what does it mean that it will be completely erected by God, constructed by God? That it will come down from the heavens fully constructed. And that image that Rashi brings, he didn't invent it. It appears in the Talmud. It appears in other places. But you have to remember that Rashi is not, especially on the Chumash, on the 5 books of Moses, Rashi is not a compendium of mystical statements. He never brings the Medrash just because it's interesting. He brings it because he thinks this is the literal meaning of your hands, God, have erected this temple. That's how he understands those words. And the question is why? Completely on the other end of the spectrum is Maimonides. We know Maimonides. We met him last week. Maimonides is very rationalist. And he comes and says, the Mashiach will build the temple in its spot. No mention of God at all. No need. Because when the time comes, and there's this special figure, leader of the entire world whose name is Mashiach, and he's going to have enough power to do this, he's going to build the temple in its location. Completely human. Has nothing to do with God doing this or doing that. And then the question becomes, so which one is right? Is it Rashi who's painting, again, a literal interpretation that the words in the Song of the Sea mean that the temple is going to come down from the heavens? Or is it Maimonides who says, no, this is going to be erected by bringing in a lot of engineers, and they're going to build plans, make plans, and you're going to have a lot of material collected, and then slowly they'll be built up, and then you'll get the temple. So which of them is correct? How should we look at this? We can take this dispute and apply it to this question of responsibility. If we take the temple or the tabernacle as representing the goal of Judaism, to create sanctity here on earth, to make something holy here on earth and not just profane as everything normally is, then you might say that the two opinions can be categorized as two different approaches to what our responsibility is. According to Rashi, we don't have a responsibility. In other words, speaking about the ultimate goal of history, it's not in our hands. We don't have a responsibility. We should just sit back and wait. It doesn't mean that you don't do anything in the meantime, because you're responsible for other things. You still have to pray 3 times a day. You still have to put on tefillin. You still have to keep Shabbos. You have to do this and this and there's many things that you need to do. However, when the temple will be constructed is not up to you. And even when the time comes, you'll know about it because it'll suddenly descend from heaven. And again, I'm not getting into the literal meaning of whether this is realistic, not realistic. When you apply this to responsibility, then what it means is sit back. You cannot take responsibility for something that is so great. It's just beyond human capacity. Maimonides, on the other hand, if we again apply his opinion to responsibility, he's saying, no, the final goal, the building of the temple, world peace, so on and so forth, is in our hands, and it depends on us. The Mashiach will build the temple physically. Those are the two sides, two possibilities. Now, normally they just remain completely dichotomous. They are two separate, diametrically opposed approaches to what is the goal of life, what is the responsibility of a person. Now, we've been talking about the tabernacle, the temple. Those are pretty big things. The question is, how much does this relate to our daily lives? When I have a goal, I have a certain goal that I want to achieve. Let's say I've set my goal as something I think every person should do. I set my goal to, for instance, by the age of, or not by age, in the next 6 months, I want to complete 2 things. I say to myself, one of them is, I want to finish this stack of books to learn. I want to study these books, and I want to study them from beginning to end. Another thing I want to do in the next 6 months is, and here it'll hit harder, I want to increase my salary from, let's say, $5,000 a month to $8,000. I want to go up by 60%. The next 6 months. Now, when it comes to studying, I have this whole, 5 books that I've decided, 2 tractates of Talmud, a whole book of Shulchan Aruch, and I want to learn this and I want to learn that. I have this stack here. The next 6 months. Should be easy because I'm stuck at home. I guess in America, a lot of people are still stuck at home. Should be easy. It's all up to me, right? The responsibility is all mine. But when it comes to my salary, or instead of saying salary, let's say my income. It doesn't have to be for one particular job that I do. If I want my income now to rise by 60%, how realistic is it that the responsibility is entirely on me? How realistic is it that I can ensure that I'll come to have $8,000 of income in 6 months? Is it my responsibility? Should I just pray for it? What should I do? How do I approach this question? What's the right way to do it? The description that we read about the tabernacle being brought to Moses in order to be erected seems to imply that it's not a clear-cut answer. It seems to imply that everything had to be ready, everything had to be in place, all the pieces of the tabernacle have to have been made and constructed properly, but then the final, call it the final stage of erecting it is a superhuman feat. Moses can't do it by himself. He can't do it. He comes to God and he says, I can't do this. So what would we expect God to say? So sit back and relax. And since he can't do it anyway, I'll do it for you. But God says something very interesting. He says, you'll go through the motions as if you have the strength to actually erect it. You'll make the motions, you'll do the actions, but it will really erect itself. So God is not content, according to this medrash, he's not content with just telling you, okay, so sit back and relax and I'll take it from here. You've done enough. Very interesting. Even the final result requires my touch, my hand, the human hand. But the final result is not achievable by the human hand. So why do I need it in the first place? Why not just make it into something that is just a miracle? Like what Rashi describes. The temple should just come flying down from the heavens. What do we gain from putting our hand there and Moses acting like he's lifting the planks, even though he can't physically do it? What's to be gained from that motion? Let me try to define it a little bit more concretely and more exactly. The tabernacle did not come down from the heaven. The tabernacle was constructed by people. It was every part of it had to be made by the artisans. Every part of it was man-made. There was no miracle here that suddenly out of nowhere the pieces came down. So people were involved for 5 months in making it, in building it. It took a lot of effort. So isn't that enough already? So we've already played our role. So now, God, you do the rest. Since we can't pick it up, it only would be fitting that now God would complete it. Why does Moses have to put his hand on this? Why hasn't enough been done already? So to answer this, you can really only answer this psychologically if you're willing to understand that we all have different levels or different parts of our psyche that work together, but they're different. They don't serve the same purpose. The part that makes the parts of the tabernacle, the part of the psyche that's involved in actually fashioning things, we call that the world of action. We call that, I guess, industriousness. Just being good at what you do, a craftsman, taking pride in your craft and doing it, and not stopping until you finish. So if your craft is writing a book, or writing articles, whatever it is. So you chunk out the words. If your craft is, I don't know, fixing cars, so you get the car up on the lift and you fix it and you do the work. If your craft is, I don't know, sports, then you do everything that's needed to be done in order to be a good sportsman. And so on. But that's the active part of the psyche. And that part is not enough. There has to be something higher. The higher part of the psyche, I don't think I'm going to be saying anything so astonishing when I reveal to you that there is a higher part of the psyche, of our psychology, that takes ownership of what was done. One of the interesting things about getting through a laborious task is that you can't keep looking if you're done. You can't keep looking at it to see if you're finished. It doesn't work that way. If you want to be able to get through a very difficult task that takes time, you have to push through it. And if you keep asking, are we there yet? Are we there yet? We all know that that's what children do. And it really weakens you. So you have to get into this mode where I'm doing things without really assessing what I've done. But once the job is finished, you have to assess it. You have to look at it. You have to take ownership over it. Whatever the job is, it doesn't matter. Because otherwise it's just busy work. Otherwise it's just, okay, I got through it and I have no idea what I did. You have to feel that this reflects you in some way. You sort of impress on what you've done the image of yourself. That's the second stage. To say another way of saying that is that is erecting the pieces. That's constructing, taking everything that all the pieces that you that you've developed, that you've made, that you've crafted, and putting them together into a whole. That whole has to have an image. It has to have some kind of picture to it. So, if you're writing an article and it's 3,000 words, and I don't know, you can write 3,000 words, let's say you write quickly, you're done with 3,000 words in a day, and then you read through it, and yeah, you've written the words, but this article isn't reflecting you. It's not yet your voice, it's not what you wanted. So then you begin to impress yourself on it. You sort of put it together. You get it to really reflect an idea that you have in your mind. That's the second stage. It comes from a different place. It's not, you can't try doing that, right? This is like any coach will tell you, if you're running laps, you can't try to feel as if you're in the actual race. It doesn't work that way. When you're running laps, when you're doing the training, you're in one state of mind. When you actually go to the competition, it's a completely different state of mind. If you run each interval during your training like you're in the competition, you'll never get anywhere because you'll be just completely conked out after one interval. You won't be able to do anything more. That'll be the end of it. So when we're working, when we're building something, the level of involvement of ourselves is actually very little. And it's sort of like we go on automatic mode and we just do things. But at some point, we have to call it our own. We have to say, this is me. This is what I did. And so a whole different aspect of the self begins to relate to what was done. When the Torah wants to talk about something like that, it says the Israelites built everything, and then they brought it to Moses, and Moses is now the figure of the self that's now going to impress itself upon the work that was done. So to say that Moses erected it symbolically is like saying that once I'm finished with all the labor and the time has come to stamp this with a seal of approval that this is mine, right? I can sign my name on it. That requires a whole different part of me. That requires something entirely different. Now, again, I said, when we're working on things, we're not so worried, at least if you know how to work, you're not so worried about how this is going to reflect on you. You just do it. Because action just requires perseverance. It just requires you to get through it. And if you can watch on the internet, there's a lot of interesting YouTube movies about this. I think one of the most interesting that I've seen is Patterson, the author. What's his first name? I forget. There's a guy who wrote A Spider or something. You have to turn your. Let me see if I can make you unmute. Just a second. Somebody wants to tell me what his name is. I can't remember. Well, I'm not. For some reason, I'm not the host, so I can't even let you. Okay, but you probably know who I'm talking about. He's written like 150 books. He's the most accomplished author in English today, I think, in all of history. So he has videos on YouTube that he coaches people about how to write. So one of the things that I found, James Patterson, thank you. Right. So along came A Spider, that became a movie and other things. So he has this YouTube video that he shows how he writes. And he says the most difficult part of it all is actually getting the words down on paper. And so he shows you how he does it. He has 3 hours of time blocked into every day that he's writing. And he sits, and in those 3 hours, he has to finish, 7,000 words. And it doesn't matter how good it is, how bad it is, it doesn't matter. He has to get through it because he's found, like most people who do big projects, that when you're working on something, you can't get involved. You just have to do it. You can't be there. In a certain sense, when it's a big project, it sort of takes care of itself. And it's not you. It just comes out. You just get through it. But that's just the first stage. He says that's the hardest stage for him. But then he has to go through what he wrote. And he does that after he's finished and he's got, 75,000 words on paper. So then he starts editing. And then he starts playing with it. And he begins to form it in his image. And I would call that the construction stage. Building it, making it into something that he can put the name James Patterson on. And then it's going to be another bestseller. And he's going to make another $50 million or whatever he makes on every one of his books. What's the difference between them? So the Torah calls this that when we're busy crafting the parts, it's like the Israelites crafting the parts of the tabernacle. Who crafted it? We don't know. We know the name of 2 head artisans, but we don't know who did what. There's no names. Because in a certain sense, a lot of these things are anonymously done. it's also true about us. We're almost not there. We're not worried about who did this. It sort of got done. And then it's brought to Moses. And Moses is already not anonymous. He's already somebody that we all know. And now he has to erect it, meaning he has to construct it, put it together, and imprint on it, as it were, his name. That stage is where responsibility really happens. Getting through the first stage is not yet responsibility. Because responsibility asks a very basic question, which is what I tried to focus in on in the dispute between Maimonides and Rashi about the construction of the third temple. Responsibility is about who in the end signs the check. Whose name is on it in the end. Responsibility is not just about getting it done. It's about once it's here, who do we come to when there are problems? Who is the one that signed on this? Who was this created by? One of the interesting things is when an artist paints a painting, I've never seen an artist sign their name before the painting is done. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but I've never seen it done. I always wondered about that. Why can't you just sign it in the beginning? Why not just buy canvases that have your name on it in some, special way? Because apparently that doesn't work. A lot of these canvases are not signed in the end because the artist is not happy with what he did. Signing the name at the end, erecting it, what we're calling here erecting, responsibility, is that I'm putting my name to it as the one responsible for this. This is mine. I created this. Every part of this, every stage of the process that went into creating the parts was anonymous in a certain sense. It was done by Israelites. It was done by workers, artisans. But the final stage, that needs a name. And so there's an amazing thing that happens at the final stage. And that's where responsibility happens. That God says to Moses, you can't put your name to this. Because you can't wholeheartedly say that you created this. It would be wrong for you to put your name to it. Because you and I both know that you simply cannot, in the language of the Medrash, you can't erect it. You can't make it stand. To make it stand is to make it now permanent, to make it a fixture in the world. A human being doesn't have that power. Why don't I have that power? Because I'm passing, because I'm fleeting. And for fleeting things, for temporary things, maybe I have that power, right? Maybe there are certain things which have no meaning in the long and short of it, and in the long term they have no meaning. So I could put my name to it. But anything that I want that will have value, lasting value, there I can't really put my name to it. I'll give you a simple example. When, well, you could almost say that this is one of the litmus tests for where you stand in the world. When I talk about my children, So are my children say my son Dov, is he Dov the son of Moshe? I don't think about him that way. I think about him as Dov, who I had the privilege, the difficulty, whatever you want to call it, of raising him. But he's his own thing. I can't put my name to him. Who puts his name to him? Well, when he goes up to the Torah, he says he's Dov, son of Moshe. But that's his issue. But as far as I'm concerned, the way that I treat it is that the responsibility is really not mine. Oh, of course I had the responsibility of changing his diapers, and I had to do this, and I had to do that, and I put him through school, and help him settle down in life, and all these things. But the responsibility in the end is not mine, because the name is not mine. Who's responsible for him? The same one who's responsible for me. It's not me. It's God. When I talk about responsibility, it's not about diapering. It's not about feeding him. It's not about those things. It's the end of what it's called in. How is this named in the end? Who is this named after? If it'll be named after me, that's not a very good choice, because I won't be here at some point. And when I contribute to my son's life, I want to contribute to it in the way that makes him not dependent upon me, because that will end at some point. He won't be able to depend on me forever. I want him to depend on the one who's really responsible for his livelihood, for his health, for his life. That's where the responsibility really is. Again, there were a lot of actions that had to be done on the way, but in a certain sense, I'm anonymous in those actions. Anybody could have done them. It's true, I have feelings for him, but I could have feelings for other children as well. I have other children too. If I end up with having to adopt the son of good friends because they can't take care of their children, so I would have feelings for them too. I would be able to raise them. Is it natural feelings, not natural feelings? Not so important. But in the end, these actions that we do, they're not where the responsibility is. They need to be done. They have to be done, but they're not sufficient. They're necessary, but not sufficient. And the sufficient condition is where the responsibility really comes in. And that the Medrash is trying to tell us by saying that when they brought it, all their actions, everything they had done, and if you read through this Parsha, this Shabbos, you'll see that 5 different times it says in these verses, when they bring it to Moses, everything they had done, everything they had done, everything they had done, 5 different times. And then Moses has to put his name on it, and God says to him, but you know you can't. Your name can't be on this. You can't erect this, because if you erect it, it'll be passing. It'll be something that has an end to it. It won't be everlasting. It won't have the power of the infinite in it, because you can't give it that power. In the tabernacle, that's crucial, because what is the tabernacle supposed to be? It's supposed to be a dwelling place for the infinite. So Moses can't give that. But when you think about it, everything that we do that has real value, we would like it to be a dwelling place for the infinite. In that sense, the responsibility has to be God's. It can't be mine. But, lest I imagine that somehow when all the pieces are in place, I can just sit back and wait for it all to come together. So God says to Moses, it's not that simple. You have to go through the actions. You still have to do your part. But when you're doing that part, have in mind that what you really want to add now is something that you can't add. What you really want to introduce into your work now, that feeling that there's something beyond the material, something that's beyond the finite, that's beyond just words if you're writing an article, that's beyond just words if you're writing a book, that's beyond just colors if you're doing a painting. That thing that will bring it together and make it alive, that you can't do. That comes from God. Yet, even now you still have to go through the motions. You just have to have in mind that you're inviting the responsibility, you're giving it to God, you're inviting the infinite to enter into the actions. You're allowing the infinite to penetrate the finite. And in every action that a person does that has value, that they want to have value, then you really need to be able to allow the infinite to enter into the finite at the final stage. And that's what Moses did here. Once Moses had done it once, the temple was erected, it's easy for everybody else to do the same thing. Meaning, once the author, let's say it's a book, has been able to capture that glimpse of the specialness of these words, the infinite that's entered into it, that makes it into the special thing that it is, then everybody can appreciate it. Then it's not a question anymore how the Levites did it later. So in a certain sense, responsibility, I've shifted the meaning of responsibility here to not focus on the actions that lead up to the end, but rather to who do you give the responsibility, who's the other here who's named into this work? Who is this named after? Who does this belong to? It's in my best interest to say that it doesn't belong to me. But I can't say that completely. I have to do the final time. I have to finish it off. I have to go through the motions of the end. But my best interest is that in the end this belongs to you, God. Put your infinite value into it. Make this thing that I created, which is as limited as it is because a human being created it. I want it to be much more than that. So now going back to our question. If I have decided that I want to finish these 5 books in the next 6 months, and I also want to increase my salary or my income from $5,000 to $8,000. With the books, if it's just going over them, it's just work. I have to put in the 5-6 hours every day, and at the end of 6 months, I'll be done. I can count how many pages I have to study each day. I can calculate it. It's not so difficult, and get through it every day. But that begs the question of, why am I doing this? Am I doing it just to say I got through these books? Especially when it's Torah. What would I like these books to do to me? That's the question, right? There's a famous saying, I can't say it in English because it doesn't work, but in Hebrew, it's I finished Shas, I finished the whole Talmud. The question is, what did the Talmud do to me when I finished it? As I learned it, did it affect me? Did it do anything to me? Did I change? I finished it, but did it finish me? So I can get through those books in 6 months. But is that what I'm looking for? Or am I looking for the infinite to reveal itself through my learning? Same thing with my income. Is my need for more income because I just want more? Or is my need for more income because I want to do more? You could have tons of extra income and do less and less for a variety of reasons. But income for me, when I look at it, increasing my income by 60% is because I want to do 60% more. Not because I want to buy 60% more things, but because more income will allow me to do more things. Things that I can't do right now because you need more resources in order to do them. So for instance, if somebody's saying, well, if I only had $8,000 a month, I would write 5 books every year, five books of Torah every year, and then he gets the $8,000 a month, but instead of doing what he planned on doing, he uses those $8,000 to, I don't know, go to Costco every other day. So what did you need that for? The income is up to me to create, but if I feel that it's mine, then all I'll do with it at the end is just indulge my needs. But if I feel that this income was created by my hard work, but it belongs to God, it's signed by God, the infinite is in it, then there's a good chance that what I'll use it for will be to reveal more of my own infinite nature, more of my own infinite abilities. And infinite, I mean things that last, things that have meaning. So that taking these $8,000, they don't end up just indulging my needs, but for instance, they could turn into, and this is said by many people, if I only had 60% more income, I would give 60% more to tzedakah, to charity. And then if you really feel that this was God's responsibility, He gave this, then it will really turn into charity. But if you don't feel that, if you feel it's my responsibility, I did this, then it could very well just serve to meet more and more of our own needs. And not go into creating more infinity in the world, more things that are beyond the finite. So responsibility becomes not so much a question about getting from point A to point B, but what is the whole thing, or who is the whole thing named after? Who created this? Who made this? Not every act by itself, but the whole, the totality. And when you look at it that way, then this medrash makes perfect sense. It's saying that still, even at the end, you're going to have to work. But at the end, you have to have in your mind that this is God's doing. And when you have that in your mind, then it's almost guaranteed that the actions that you've taken will be filled with divine light. They'll be filled with infinite meaning. Even simple things become infinitely meaningful if you're able to do that at the end. One of the things, for instance, I mentioned children before because it's one of the things that people have a hard time with. It takes them some people don't come to this until their deathbed. They're not able, sometimes they can't even do it on their deathbed. They can't look at their children and say, they are infinite beings. Why can't they say that? Because they've taken responsibility for them in the sense that they belong to them. My child doesn't belong to me. The actions that I did, okay, maybe. But the final result always has to be that you, God, are responsible for this. This is yours. This works in many different areas. For instance, I don't want to get into it tonight because we don't have time, but scientists have a whole big problem with this. It's not that the science that we have today is incorrect. It's that it's void of divinity. It could very well be I had a doctor a long time ago, many years ago, who was able to heal me from something that's usually people don't heal from. And he and I both attributed it to the fact that he kept saying, I can only give you the prescription. Whether or not it works, that's up to God. So what do I do to help that along? So he is a very religious man. So he said, every Friday before Shabbos when I go to the mikveh, so when I'm under the water, I hand over all my patients to God. And I say, now it's your problem. I did what I could. Now it's your problem. You figure it out. So in the end, he's not afraid to say it's a miracle. It's not a miracle. What do you mean? You gave me a prescription. I took the medicine. It helped. No, it's a miracle because in his mind, it's a miracle. In his mind, it's the divine intervening. We did what we could. We did as much as we knew according to medicine. But in the end, the success is not named after us. We're not responsible for the success. By the way, we're also not responsible for the failure. But that's a more difficult topic that I don't want to get into today because it will take another hour. Okay, so I hope that that's some food for thought about the things that matter to us and how to do them and how to, I hope, treat responsibility more responsibly in a certain sense and to be able to introduce, to make room for the divine, for the infinite to enter into our actions, into all our actions. All our actions can be of this type. It matters at the end, who do you attribute it to? Who do you give it to? Who's responsible for this? Okay, so that's enough talk from me. And now there's an opportunity for everybody else to talk. So anybody wants to say anything, maybe, well, first of all, before, I will say something more before everybody leaves and disappears. A lot of this has to do with a topic that I've discussed in length based on Rabbi Ginsburg's teachings. And you can find it on my Patreon, patreon.com/MGENUTH. To see the classes on faith and confidence, it's a whole series there on faith and confidence. You can see one, I think about 5 of them are freely available. The rest you have to become a patron. The other thing I wanted to mention is that a year and a half ago, actually it was already 2 years ago, we had a weekly publication that was distributed to some locations in the United States, and we stopped with it because the printing and distribution in the United States was just too difficult. Recently, we've started experimenting with Amazon publishing. So Amazon's very quick and easy, and I think that for most people in North America, the shipping would even be free. So we're thinking about restarting this. It'll be like a weekly or bi-weekly publication with Rabbi Ginsburg's teachings, similar to things that we talked about in these classes, and other things that we have in our newsletter. If you don't get the newsletter, you should go to inner.org and sign up for the newsletter and get the classes every week. But we're thinking about doing this. So if anybody wants to write me about their interest in this, if you didn't participate in the previous experiment from 2 years ago, then I'm going to write my email here in the chat. And you can be in touch with me about that. So now, I can't. Unfortunately, I can't. I'm not the host, so I can't even open people's. Let me try to wake up Elazar. Elazar, אתה מקשיב?
Yes, open, yes.
So open them. תפתח לכולם.
פתוח.
Okay, anybody wants to can now turn their microphone on, I hope.
Excuse me, what will the name of this be? Will it be uploaded to YouTube so that I can present it somewhere else?
The YouTube channel, אלעזר, אתה יכול לכתוב את הכתובת של היוטיוב? בצ'אט? I don't know by heart. Maybe he's not listening. I'll find it in a second, and I'll put it in the chat. It's also on my here. Okay, so Elazar just put up the link for Gali Nice students that has all the English classes. If you want just mine, so I think this is it, and I have a daily class in the morning here in Israel time, and it's really late at night in America. We start at 8 o'clock Israel time, 8:30 Israel time, so that's like 1:30 a.m. But then everything is uploaded to the YouTube channel, so you can see it there. So,
will this be called Chassidic Psychology?
Yes.
Well, what's the name of this class?
Right. Chassidic Psychology. Right. I believe I remember the link. Anyway, this is the time for anybody else who wants to speak. And my email I put up there. Okay, so anybody want to show themselves and tell us a little bit about where you're from, how you got to us? Everybody's so quiet. The other thing is, Jose? Okay. The other thing I want to mention is that there are a lot of other classes in this room in English. And if you're not getting the links, if you're not getting the reminders, you should join our WhatsApp, the Gali and I WhatsApp. And to do that, let me see if I can give you a link right now. Gali and I 4, let's try that. If you want to join the Gali and I WhatsApp, here's the link. And then you'll get reminders about all the... So Mark already wrote. Great. So I can see that. Okay. So it's a pleasure seeing everybody. And I hope to see everybody again next week. I mean, questions or anybody else want to say something? Okay.
Thank you. God bless you. It was interesting.
You too. Okay. Take care, everybody. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye. Hope to see you next week.